All right, everybody. All right, let's get started. So, we'll invite our planning team to come forward. And we're going to start off with the transportation adequacy and elements and school build-out. Glenn.
I just didn't know whether or not you wanted the chairman to have a chance to give a little
a little overview? All right.
I don't know if he does or not.
Sure.
Just excited to be here.
Okay.
Seriously, this is a great plan, and it's probably high time to take better advantage of this, of Forest Glen Metro Station. I think there's a lot of opportunities to get some great community amenities, as well as some housing, and to reimagine George Avenue. So
it's a lot of change needed in this area, that's for sure. Hopefully the market will be there to make some of this happen.
I should say I've been in touch with SHA over the last few days, and they seem to be not only receptive to a lot of the ideas in the plan, but seem to be moving forward with their work on George Avenue. So
that's a big piece of it, that's for sure. All right, good opening statement.
Okay, thank you. In the staff report for transportation in schools and fiscal impact statement, the only issues I brought up were those where there's some disagreement with the final draft. I mean, there's a whole lot of agreement here.
Can you just, before you go into the disagreement, can you just kind of in a general way talk about the strategy and the vision of the plan then? Sometimes I think we proceed into the weeds without just describing the big picture. Would be helpful.
Do I
Morning,
need to say my
Katie.
name for the record? Okay, sorry. Thank you. Katie Mencarini for the record. Our approach to this was we were really trying to concentrate on how to make this area more livable, especially for the people immediately around it, recognizing that this is also a regional transportation corridor. So we were focusing first and foremost on safety, and then the second priority was looking to make multimodal connections and comfort more of a focus, and then finally looking at the cars and trying to make sure we're doing as little harm as possible, recognizing that congestion is what it is, and there's only so much that we can do that we support in terms of mitigation. So we looked at all the strategies to make this the best transportation and healthiest that we could.
And also to add, really, I mean, the central issue is we have a red line metro station right in the middle of this plan area, which is one of the, for the record, Gwen Wright, Planning Director, that is one of the stations that is not used as much as we feel that it should be. It's an extremely important piece of infrastructure, and we feel particularly right near the metro station, we need to make much better use of that infrastructure. And then also, as Katie mentioned, as you get a little farther south from the metro station, really dealing with safety and trying to work closely with SHA on improvements to George Avenue to turn it from a sort of throughway, which it is now, to something that is actually going to help support development, support a comfortable living community, and promote safety.
I was amazed by the testimony we got. It might have been from Planning Board, I'm not sure, about what share of those who park at the Forest Glen Metro live within a half mile or so. It's essentially a local option parking lot, which may have something to do with the crossing of George Avenue and just, yeah. So anything we can do to improve the efficiency there, but it shows that we have a lot of opportunity. And just generally, big picture, this you'll get to this in course of your memo, but the state and it's we've been advocating as a community, as a council, for the state to make its big fix George Avenue. How does that factor in, Glenn?
Well, it's included in the plan. The plan assumes that alternative 5B, which is the preferred alternative for the state highway, which they're beginning to design on, will eventually be built. Of course, master plans can't talk about when something's going to be built. That's the CIP, or in this case of the state, the CTP.
Right.
This just basically says this is what we want to see by build-out. And sometimes there's sort of interim stages that are included in master plans. For the most part, though, it's build-out recommendations.
It's 5B is basically what the recommendation is, which is also what the state highways folks believe is the right recommendation.
Yeah, we have the rare opportunity where there's consensus with the public, there's consensus with M.SHA and with the planning department. We looked at that again and came up with a couple of key improvements that could further enhance that original intent and purpose and need, and we're really excited about it, and that was a big catalyst for this plan in the first place.
Yep.
And to give you an idea as to how long these things take, the original idea for doing what ultimately ended up being 5B came from the planning board and the council in the North and West Silver Spring plan, which was adopted 20 years ago. So it's taken that long to get from that recommendation to something which at least has been approved by State Highway for design. It's still not funded, though.
And is that length of time just because State Highway has not prioritized the engineering work, or?
It's a lack for years and years, and continues to this day. MDOT is very loath to put new projects in the CTP because they're always short of money.
Yeah.
And when they're not short of money, they're using it for projects of a more regional scale. So it's I'm hoping there's a way we can actually get this funded sometime soon, but history would suggest otherwise.
And we're hoping with the momentum of this plan that there will be a lot of energy to get this design for Georgia Avenue to move beyond just the design phase, which has been funded, and to move into construction funding. But we need to keep the coalition of people who have become interested in this plan together to advocate for that even after this plan is adopted, because this is a beginning, not an end, in terms of that project.
And there is such a community desire now to have a quality environment locally that they can walk to and take advantage of, that I think maybe a kind of a perspective that wasn't as strong years ago, but is very strong now. When I talk to folks who live around there, they just really want to be able to take their family and walk, to a whatever. And I say, I think we all know when you're standing on Georgia Avenue today, about to cross the street, which I do regularly because I go to the aquarium store, or there, you feel like, what am I doing here? This is like, I might as well be on the moon.
Can I just,
Yeah,
I
Andrew.
just follow up this point, and then I'll be quiet. One of the things that might nudge this along a little bit is the councils and the executive are overdue for approving a new state transportation priorities letter.
Right.
And if this is higher in the priority list, with everything, of course, you have to think of everything else that's there too, then that might help a little bit.
Yeah, well, we should bump it up on the priorities list. I mean, this is truly a gateway to Montgomery County, and
the other thing the state's been not shy about hinting is that if there's county money to contribute to this, they might be more amenable to programming it.
Right.
But that's a sort of a slippery slope too.
Well, it's, again, long overdue. 20 years ago, we recommended this. Nothing has really changed. It has only deteriorated in those 20 years. And this is, for many people, this is one of the main entries into the county. But for us, this is our coming home gateway, and or our whatever. It needs to change. Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to kind of highlight some things that were said earlier. I think I was talking with Delegate Jared Solomon this morning about this particular plan, about some really encouraging meetings and conversations with State Highway about Georgia Avenue. I think there's universal agreement about the progress and momentum, probably more so in the last 6 or 9 months than in the last 25 years in terms of actually moving the ball forward and fulfilling some of the commitments that have been made, some of the needs that have been discussed for a really long time. So I think a lot of that is due to the plan and due to the community buy-in as part of the plan. And so I think this is an exciting opportunity for us to really talk through that and really to be able to work with State Highway on this to make sure that we're fulfilling what we said. I also think that it was really important. I'm glad you noted the half mile. I was probably most struck by that as well. And I think it's really important. We talk about walk sheds a lot, and we talk about a half mile being a half mile being a half mile as if every half mile is the same. And the reality is, walkability has somewhat to do with distance, but more to do with what is between the point at which you are to the point at which you're going, and the safety and the comfort level and the accessibility of those entry points. And so I think this really highlights that. I think there's additional opportunity to add walkability. I also think further down the line we should be talking about microtransit and other opportunities. And so I know that's mentioned in here, so I look forward to having that conversation as well, because I think as we talk about the urbanizing of the county, I think there are this is one that really highlights that that formerly was a transition between urban areas in a suburban area. Now it's an urban area as well. And so we really need to re-engineer our roads. We need to re-engineer our thinking about the way that we plan and do land use in areas like this, where people are not expecting to get in their car and drive 3/4 of a mile. They want to be able to safely walk with a stroller or with a friend, and currently they can't do that safely, and so we have to fix it.
All right. Glenn.
Okay, thank you. So the first item has to do with the congestion standard that's used in the plan. Currently, it's 80 seconds per vehicle of delay at each intersection. It's 1.33 minutes, and that's an average congestion level. So depending upon when you arrive at the intersection in a car, it could be 2 minutes or more, or a lot less, but depending when you hit it, which is fairly congested. The planning board is recommending increasing the standard in this planning area to 120 seconds per vehicle, which is obviously 2 minutes, and you could have as much as 3 minutes or more in terms of delay at each intersection, depending, again, when you hit it. That's the same standard as used for red areas, or we used to call metro station policy areas. For years, Forest Glen, as has been pointed out before, has been treated differently than other metro station areas because of the history here. The history was that when the decision was made 40 years ago, really, to have a metro station here as part of the original metro system, it was very contentious. And the idea was, well, all right, we'll put one here, but we're not going to make it a development node. That has changed. This plan changes that. It's not a major development node. It's not Bethesda, but it is a place where we're talking about adding development, and the community is now more mixed in terms of its feelings about this. So again, the plan recommends 120 seconds per vehicle. The rationale, I believe, in that the planning draft, the final draft has, I think doesn't really apply, because it could apply to any one of a number of other areas which we don't apply 120 seconds per vehicle. One that comes right to mind is Four Corners. Four Corners, Montgomery Hill is not that different. It's a small commercial area, a lot of traffic running through it, probably 75-80% or more running through the intersection is non-local. Yet we're not talking about raising the standard there to 120 seconds per vehicle. However, fortunately, because it is near a metro station, and because this plan, and I believe you generally endorse this, is to make this more of a node for development, that there is justification for establishing this as a red policy area, formerly metro station policy area. And that would allow the rationale to apply the 120 seconds per vehicle standard at most of the intersections in the plan, from August Drive to the north, down to Seminary Road to the south. All of those within a half a mile walking distance of the Forest Glen Metro Station. It would exclude the intersections at Dennis Avenue and at 16th Street from north and south respectively, but the analyses that have been done for intersection capacity don't go above the 80 seconds per vehicle threshold, with some minor improvements which are also in the plan. So that's my recommendation, is to add text in the plan calling to include in the SSP, the subdivision staging policy, a new red policy area encompassing an area roughly 1.5 mile radius from the Forest Glen Metro Station. The other advantage of this, by the way, is that under the transportation impact tax, the rates that are applied in red policy areas are less than half those applied in orange policy areas. So you'd be considerably reducing the transportation impact tax for any new development that would happen within this new policy area. And the actual implementation of that red policy area would be done either as an amendment to the SSP, which you could do at any time. It would take about 2 or 3 months to actually go through the process to do it, with public hearing notice and all, or it could just be included in the next update of the SSP, which is due to come to you from the planning board on August 1st and due for you to approve on no later than November 15th next year.
All right, let me ask Casey, what's the basis for the 122nd recommendation? Glen seems to want, forgive the informality here, the, a hook with the red area. Is that, you've just recommended?
We're okay with the red area. I mean, I think that
standard. Is there some procedural reason why 122nd, picking a standard for these intersections is somehow inconsistent?
I think that the reason we recommended this delay threshold in the plan was that we felt that it was an intermediate level between the two, between Wheaton and Silver Spring. This is basically a place that's kind of on the way to and from. We're trying to give it a more ability to become its own place, and it seemed appropriate to have some intermediate standard that would accommodate development but not be too out of line with how you deal with other major arterials. We're fine with the red zone approach. In fact, that has some appeal.
But why not do both, in a sense? I mean, my concern is that with Glen's recommendation, you're still leaving some intersections that are at the existing standard, and then as a result, I think the development that would go there would have to meet a different test that would find it would be very difficult, right? Am I wrong?
We think that that intersection with 16th will work, but the other part is that, as Glen had mentioned, the implementation, roughly half a mile, I think leaves us a little bit of wiggle room to go an extra block or whatever. So I think you could draw the red zone line in a way that solves all the problems that might arise, and I think that would be all right.
I think 16th Street's well above half a mile, as it turns out, but
Above, like
it's like, I think it's 3,200 feet or something.
It's one more intersection.
Right.
Well,
but
16th Street hardly matters if the plan recommendation is adopted, unless you have to pay an impact tax for the trips you generate to a park, right?
No, you don't. So maybe.
But what about the housing on the other side of the street?
We think that it's going to meet the threshold. It'll be close, but it'll be within the threshold.
Yeah, so we generally agree with Dr. Orland in saying that this area probably should be considered as a red policy area because it is a metro station.
I agree with that.
And that will end up making the idea of changing to 120 not only rational but also consistent with how we treat other red policy areas. And so, we essentially agree. We think when we get to the point in the SSP of drawing the red policy area, we'll confer with council staff and we'll give some good thought to that to make sure we're
Right.
drawing the red area.
I don't think it has to
most
be
appropriate.
precisely a half a mile.
No, but about a half a mile. I mean, for example, Forest Glen, Montgomery Hills planning area, where there's commercial development and where there's multifamily, is actually pretty narrow. So you may not go even a half a mile east and west of Georgia Avenue. You may go
Right.
a lesser amount. But that's, again, get the planning staff and board.
So
first
my
crack at that.
narrow question is, the missing middle or townhouse that is called for across the street from where 16th Street hits Georgia Avenue, or the Dennis Avenue Health Center, if we were to proceed with one day an affordable community there, are they going to have to meet a congestion standard that is extremely difficult to meet? Glenn? under your recommendation? And what are the consequences for that if they do, or is it?
Well, when I get to the next point in the memo, I'm pointing out that a lot of the development in the plan is not going to be able to go forward even at 120 seconds per vehicle unless you allow for more substantial intersection, in fact, some intersection improvements, which are not explicit in the plan. And I have some rationale for sort of some fudgy language there because there's a lot we don't know. But, so we can't answer that
Okay.
question.
I mean, my primary concern is I don't want to say we want a big affordable development at the Dennis Avenue Health Center. Oh, in order to do that, you've got to, all these changes are needed, none of which are really needed for that development. 99.99999% of it are needed because of people living everywhere else in Montgomery County and in D.C.
Well, and this isn't, when we get to the next issue, this is, I guess there was maybe some just disagreement in philosophy in terms of what plans are supposed to do.
Right.
Plans are not strictly for the people who live and work
Right.
in this area. It's also to solve problems for people traveling through the area.
Understood, but
so-
I think our strategy should just be to call for the changes that we need for transportation and to call for the housing that we need for housing and to limit housing in this area of all
No,
areas.
We do not expect that housing will be limited due to these recommendations.
Okay.
What it would mean is that there might have to be some intersection improvements or other kinds of mitigation, transportation management plans, things that are going to help mitigate the number of vehicle trips when that housing is built. But this is part of our regular development review process. We work on very large projects like Grosvenor Strathmore to come up with ways to make sure that as those projects move forward, there are intersection improvements that keep us at the right number of seconds. So we do not see that the levels of housing we're talking about in either of the locations that you mentioned, we don't see that that's going to break the bank in terms of the delay provision, and it may require some mitigation, but I don't think it's going to break the bank.
And even that mitigation during the SSP, I hope that we're going to look again at the priorities for mitigation, even in the orange areas, not just the red areas, so it's clear that you don't necessarily want to widen all the roads at a place like this. But I think we can address that during the SSP.
Yeah, I mean, I would just be more inclined to just draw a broader red area, I think, but, all right, colleagues, Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with the staff recommendation. I think we could take up the exact boundaries during the SSP. I don't think we need an SSP amendment since we're taking up the SSP. It seems to be a lot of work when we should just be taking it up then. I think the benefit here is, in the interest of compromise, we sometimes don't always arrive at the most consistent and thoughtful policy. I think this is an example of it. This should be a red policy area. It's a metro station. These used to be called metro station policy areas. The fact that it's not one is, I think, just indicative of trying really hard to get everybody on board to something, and this is kind of righting that mistake, or I don't want to call it a mistake, but righting that inconsistency that was needed to arrive at a previous outcome. I think we can address the boundaries at the SSP, but I think the key here is, there's also other benefits to red policy areas, including transportation impact taxes and others. There's purposes for why we have the policy areas that we do that's not just based on speed and congestion. It's also based on the most appropriate places where we want to drive development as close to significant public investments in transportation as possible. And so I think we will get additional benefits here. Exactly where we draw the line can be determined at a later date, but I think the red policy area, keeping the language broad enough to take it up in the SSP makes a lot of sense. And I think the benefit there as well is if that standard changes for policy areas, we won't have to go back and change this as well. It will just change to whatever the red policy areas are countywide, which is in the interest of consistency in policy making is what it should be anyway.
Well,
Thank you.
As Department of Transportation, I see at least one. I just want to get your thought. You guys commented on this saying, and while you're coming up, I'll read it. We are concerned that the trend in recent master plans increasing the delay standards is unsustainable approach. It does not reflect the multimodal intent of having varying traffic performance standards. Simply increasing the intersection delay threshold does not automatically mean that other alternatives are provided or performance for the other modes is achieved, and on its own could be detrimental to mixed traffic bus services along the corridor. Does this red traffic area, which basically is another way, I agree that this is a metro, makes sense, but it would still allow the 122nd. Could you just comment on, do you still have that same concern, or is that just a general comment on plans going forward, and just you could expound on that a little bit?
Andrew Bossi, Montgomery County DOT. It has been a general comment recently, just kind of calling out where
Recently, over the last year, I think?
Yes.
Especially?
especially over the last year, calling out where our current policy does kind of drop the ball on addressing how to, bless you, how to get other modes moving in that same traffic. By pushing this into the SSP, we are having a discussion on how to get to a different direction, and that's why I think this is a good recommendation, simply because we are working on addressing it through that route.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, and we often hear, which very legitimate concerns about, okay, you're allowing development, how are we going to handle the traffic, how are we going to handle the school capacity, and I just wanted that to be explicitly stated, and since it's in the packet, so thank you.
Welcome.
And I would concur with my colleagues. I think it makes sense to follow the staff recommendation.
Well, I don't want to yet sign off on a specific half-mile radius. So I think red area is good. I think we ought to leave that exact radius unresolved at the moment. We don't have to decide everything all at once. And but we do need to have a clear statement before we finish the plan. So I'm comfortable with just putting a pin in this, and we'll keep talking it through as we proceed, and then we'll finish it before we're done.
Okay,
So we have a general concurrence, yes, exactly. We have general concurrence with staff about making it a red policy area, but, half mile is the recommendation from staff. Let's give that some thought. Maybe that's what we go with, or maybe we say, why don't we draw it out a little bit broader, depending on our view of what the impact is.
can I ask Mr. Joanna and Mr. Friedson whether they agree with the second point in terms of what the recommendation is?
Do you want to set the half mile now, or do you want to leave that and come back to that?
Roughly half mile.
My sense originally was that the roughly half mile provided the level of flexibility that would then be taken up in the SSP. So that was my understanding. I'm not sure I disagree with you philosophically. I think I just was under the impression that we already had that flexibility, but I don't feel strongly enough that I'm happy to formally take it up later on this once we figure out exactly what the best language would be.
I'm similarly situated. I don't. Are we going to get new information?
Yeah, I think
from the planning department. I mean,
Well, I think it's going to come up really during the SSP. We weren't planning on drawing the
Okay.
line of the red area boundary as part of this plan, and maybe that would be just the text that Dr. Orland suggested, where it says encompassing
Okay.
an area of roughly 1/2 mile, but with the final boundary to be determined during the SSP.
I think roughly gives us flexibility.
Yeah,
seems
that's
to
what
be
I thought.
flexibility to me. So.
That works.
We agree to agree here, I think.
All right.
So you agree with Ms. Wright's language?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you. The next issue is related is the intersection improvements. There, as with most master plans, most sector plans, the planning staff asks for a more detailed evaluation of what intersection improvements might be needed to meet the standard. And they did that. They hired a firm, Mead and Hunt, to work on that. And the results of their analysis are on page 4 of the packet. And on page 4, there are several recommendations that would either repurpose a lane, which means not adding a lane, but just using it differently, through lane rather than a turn lane or something like that. But there are several examples where additional turn lanes above which are, or through lanes above which exist now, would be included. there are several issues regarding this. That's a nice analysis to have done, a good analysis to have been done, but it's missing a couple things. First of all, that analysis did not look at what's called spillback effects. So, for example, at the intersection of George Avenue and Seminary Road in the morning, there's a backup from that heading for traffic heading southbound to the point where it often backs up through the Seminary Place George Avenue intersection. And similarly, in the evening, there are backups from the interchange, from the weaving that occurs there that this plan would address, back through several of the intersections within Montgomery Hills. So it's likely that the analysis that Mead and Hunt did actually underestimates the congestion that's there. And they're saying that even with 120 seconds per vehicle, it would be exceeded without doing some kind of additional intersection improvements of the sort that are on page 4. Furthermore, since we really don't know precisely what the design of the George Avenue Beltway interchange is going to be, that we're not sure what the effect is of that's going to be, particularly heading northbound in the evening. And finally, as has been mentioned a couple times now, we're going to have a new SSP by next fall, and you don't know yet what the standard's going to be. Maybe it's not going to be 120 seconds per vehicle anymore. Maybe it's going to be something that DOT's talked about, which is looking at the entire corridor in that area rather than individual intersections. So a lot of ifs and buts and whatever. But I think it's important that the plan at least recognize that there might be, after all of that, the need to actually add some intersection improvements above and beyond what exists today. There may be the need for a double left turn lane somewhere rather than a single left turn. There may need to be another through lane through a particular intersection there is today. And so I'm suggesting sort of a general language, which is the top of page 5, which would say the following. At the time of this sector plan's adoption, both the final design of the George Avenue Beltway interchange and its effect on vehicle delay and the local area transportation review standard to be used in the 2020 to 2024 SSP are not known. Therefore, any intersection improvement that is needed to meet the congestion standard in the, what I would say, in the then current SSP, rather than most current, is in conformance with the sector plan. And this is important, I think, because at least the way the LATR test is today, unless you can meet that test, your development can't be approved. It may be able to be done strictly by TDM improvements. It may be able to be done by changing the standard if that happens in the SSP, but it may not. And so this language basically says if after all of that, and Mr. Anderson's absolutely right, the policy of the planning board and the council really also, it's really the planning board's policy because you only deal with subdivision, the council does not. But the council has gone along with what the planning board's doing, which is to say that if you have a subdivision you're reviewing, the first several attempts you should try to make the intersection work are reducing demand by encouraging other modes through some other kinds of improvements like bikeways or better sidewalks or whatever, and the adding turn lanes or through lanes is the last resort. But nevertheless, after all that, you may have a situation where you would need to do that to meet the standard, and this language, I think, would accomplish that. And it's important, I think, to have this in there because the right-of-way is very constrained, particularly through Montgomery Hills. And we're already talking about alternative 5B, which has a median where there's a turn lane now, a reversible lane. We're talking about sidewalks which are set back from the curb, not right up against the curb. They're talking about a two-way cycle track through there as well, that just doesn't exist today. And so land or right-of-way width is at a premium here. But nevertheless, I think you need to have a language like this to cover that base.
Can I ask, are these items, these are not part of 5B then?
No.
Correct.
Most of them are not.
Some of them are?
So they
Katie?
take into account 5B. What the exercise that we did is we wanted to see both at the 80 seconds delay standard, which is what we have today, and then what staff recommended as the 120, what would it take? And even at the 120, there is mitigation that would be needed to meet it. However, given our values with Vision Zero and trying to provide safety of crossings, we said this was good information to have, as Dr. Orland mentioned, and we put it in the appendix, but it's not worth going forward because there's so many variables here. The interchange causes so many of the spillback and the queuing issues that it just seemed like there were too many what ifs and trying to think ahead and layer it all together, that it made sense to say, all right, this is what it would take given the math problem that we have today. But we would recommend first addressing the interchange, and as Dr. Orland says in here, talking about looking at the signal bypass. Those things could make a huge difference, and then from there reevaluating. Because I don't think all of this is going to happen within the horizon year of the plan. So I think it would make sense to prioritize alternative 5B, which includes an interchange improvement, and then we would also add the signal bypass, then relook at it after that. And then just as also Dr. Orland said, all of the individual development projects will have to do their own LATR study, so that will also be addressed in that.
And so the important nuance is that the information on page 4 is not a set of recommendations that you must do these intersection improvements. It is in the appendix, and it's a list of possible intersection improvements. It's like a menu of possible intersection improvements. But we will encourage a development project that comes forward to explore the other kinds of multimodal options before getting to some of these larger intersection improvements.
All right. Andrew?
Yeah, I agree with the staff recommendation. I was thinking about the menu as well, and having, knowing what is on the menu at the restaurant, but not having to pre-order is a good way to approach it. I only wanted to ask the question of whether it would be appropriate here to include some mention of safety, since we have adopted Vision Zero, and that is a big focus of what we're looking at, of including, along with, to meet the congestion standard, the most current SSP, and in compliance with our commitment to Vision Zero, or some language in there, because some of the intersection improvements should be taken into consideration pedestrian safety as well.
We could include that, but I guess we could include that. The short answer is yes.
Sure.
I love short answers.
So again, Gwen, Forest Glen and Georgia Avenue, the metro development, or Katie, as that project wants to go forward, what you'll look at this list of recommendations and you'll see what you think is realistic, but nothing is.
Well, I think the first thing we would do is have the project do a traffic study to see what impact it really will have. And it depends a lot on how many units end up being built, whether they have a lot of parking or a little parking, whether they do a transportation demand management plan. There will be many, many factors that go into that study. If after all of that, it looks like they still don't meet the, again, if at that time it's 120-second delay standard, then we would step back and take a look at some of these ideas that are on the menu.
But the intersection today does not meet the 120-second standard.
Correct.
And so.
But I would also add, I am more comfortable with this menu of options if the passageway is installed, because this does have additional turn lanes, and it creates more exposure for the pedestrians that are trying to cross the surface level. So I would emphasize that passageway would be integral to that menu. I'm not saying that the developer would put in the passageway, but I think that it's a lot more tolerable at the surface level if that other improvement is installed.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was always sort of the strategy was we're going to get the tunnel, the passageway, and we're going to allow the development on the metro parking lot. But I don't know how that development can be responsible for reducing the amount of traffic on Georgia Avenue. It's just pretty hard.
I mean, again, in our development review process, we deal with this issue all the time. Grosvenor, Strathmore, new development, it can't be responsible for dealing with all of the traffic on Rockville Pike.
Yeah.
I mean, we understand that.
Okay.
So this is something that comes up in almost every development project we have that's on a major
Okay.
road, and we feel like we can work through it at the time we actually have a development case.
Okay. So I think that's fine. Your recommendation, no objection there?
Mr. Duwanda?
With adding some safety language? Sure.
Or, looking at Mr. Duwanda, he's got a thumbs up, okay.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
So, okay, so make sure everybody, you got to keep score here, too.
I just said without objection, so that would have been the moment for anyone
okay, got it.
to signal an objection.
So you're agreeing with the staff recommendation, but adding some language about, so as not to hurt, not to deleteriously affect pedestrian safety, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The next issue is Woodland Drive Extended. And you all were out there on the tour, so you've seen it. The final draft plan, excuse me, recommends extending Woodland Drive from its dead end for the few feet up to Medical Park Drive. And then furthermore, carrying it as a new street between Medical Park Drive and Dennis Avenue through the Medical Park development, or complex. The plan also recommends that all of that, both the piece from the dead end up to Medical Park Drive and the piece that goes through the Medical Park itself, be classified as a business district street. You heard a lot of testimony, and we've gotten a lot of correspondence in opposition, particularly to to removing the dead end and extending it to Medical Park Drive. The concern is that by making that a through street, there'll be a lot of cut-through traffic, basically through the middle of the church, St. John the Evangelist Church complex. We have the church on the west side and the school on the east side, exposing a lot of the students who go back and forth to that traffic, which otherwise, as I mentioned, is a cul-de-sac. And they're also concerned about just generally adding more traffic through the neighborhood, not just that street, but others, for people who are trying to avoid Georgia Avenue. In reviewing this, I sort of have two minds about this. First of all, that if the street is connected, there are ways, the council's had ways for many, many years to deal with both cut-through traffic and speeding on a secondary street, which basically Woodland Drive is. One is the cut-through traffic regulation, which has been in effect for 25 years, says that a street like Woodland Drive, which again is mostly secondary residential, if it has more than 250 vehicles per hour using it in any hour, peak hour, lunch, whatever, and if more than half of that is non-local, in other words, it's not coming from the community, however that's defined, and that ends up being a contentious piece sometimes, then that would trigger a cut-through traffic study that DOT would do. They'd look at ways of trying to mitigate that cut-through traffic by turn restrictions or even prohibitions during certain hours of the day, so that goes away. If that plan is then approved by more than 50% of the affected citizens in the area, and again, this affected citizens is designed by the area of influence that DOT draws, then that would be implemented. It's a sort of a laborious process because, as you can imagine, you're balancing a lot of needs here. There's some people who would like to see the road connected, and there are others who don't, for obvious reasons. And so that's the process for cut-through traffic. And then for traffic calming, we have a speed hump regulation, which says that on a secondary residential street, you can have standard speed humps as long as the speed and the volumes are high enough, and there's enough speed and volumes are high enough to warrant it. And there are other things the county can just do on its own through the traffic calming CIP to narrow the street, to put in either physically with moving the curbs in, or drawing edge lines which narrow the lanes. There's certainly enforcement that can be done through smart trailers or police enforcement. There are lots of things that could be done. So with all of that, one thought is, well, just agree with the planning board that make the connection, and if a problem really does manifest itself, then these other processes would kick in. If you go that route, the only caveat I would make is I would say that the piece of Woodland Drive between the dead end and Medical Park Drive, that few feet, that ought to be classified not as a business district street, but as a secondary residential street, which is what the rest of Woodland Drive is.
All right, can we, all right.
But can I get to the other option?
Sure,
too?
sure. I just wanted to make sure we get folks to explain that. But
Okay,
keep
the
going.
second option is the same as the first option, all of that, but then you put a couple caveats on that. Even if you classify that little short section as being secondary residential street, you still wouldn't do the connection unless two other things occur. One is that the Georgia Avenue, Dennis Avenue intersection fails the standard. The standard currently, and as proposed, would be still be 80 seconds per vehicle. It doesn't fail under the analyses that were done by Mead and Hunt, but if for some reason it does, that's one condition. And then secondly, even if that happens, then to see if we can get a new full movement signalized intersection at Medical Park Drive and George Avenue. So there's a second access out onto George Avenue for folks in the neighborhood wanting to go south, or people coming to the Medical Park Drive area going southbound, making a left turn into it. If the State Highway ultimately says, no, we're not going to allow that, and frankly, I don't see a rationale for their not doing it if there's a problem, because the spacing is far enough apart that it should be accommodated. But if they still say no, then and only then would you make the connection so that folks from the Medical Park Drive area or Dennis Avenue area can get out onto George Avenue going southbound on August Drive, which does have a full movement signalized intersection. So in both cases, I'm recommending the plan at least leave in the plan a connection. But the first one basically says just go ahead pretty much and do it. And the second one would say, yeah, but not unless these other two things occur, which I think are probably not very likely. And the final point, the plan also recommends extending, actually it's on the part of the bikeway plan, is to have a bike breezeway run up Woodland Drive, and including this missing piece between the dead end and Woodland Drive, and also sidewalks. There's no opposition to that at all, so that would still be in the plan regardless. Sorry.
All right.
That's a long explanation.
Planning.
We strongly support number one. I live on First Avenue, as you know, between Spring and Ballard, which is a very similar situation. It's a through street. It goes all the way through. It parallels George Avenue. It's one block in. Gets lots of rush hour demand, but there are turn restrictions. There are speed bumps. It's very manageable, and we believe strongly that you shouldn't miss the opportunity to try to create some additional grid connections. It creates resiliency in the system. It's not really about whether or not the adjoining intersection is failing under some congestion standard. It's about the ability to get around an accident or an episodic kind of an interruption in the access along the main route, and it's a way to find alternative ways out of the neighborhood, so not all the traffic has to be loaded up on exactly the same entrance point to the main arterial. This is in some ways it's among, I don't want to say the original sin, but it's among the many sins of how the suburbs were developed, and the chance to start knitting that street rig back together again is something that I don't think we should miss.
Well, I think we should have a little dose of reality here as far as cut-through traffic, because there's a park on one end of the street, at both ends. And so it doesn't go from an A to a B.
Right, much less than my neighborhood. My neighborhood
Yeah.
goes all the way through.
And I will
This
say
one
I have
doesn't.
never
Yeah.
used your street as
Right.
a cut-through,
Right.
although
You're welcome to use
it
our
wasn't a
street
favor to
anytime
you.
want. It's
You know,
public right of way.
It's
It's there
well,
for-
actually, you have those turn restrictions, and frankly, I wish you hadn't said that.
That's true.
But in any event, I do understand the school and church community feeling like they have something today, and they'll have less of that in the future. But I think there's a lot of other folks who feel like they need access, and this is, an important access point.
And it's a public street. It's
And
not
it's
a
a
private
public
driveway.
street, and
It's a
yeah,
public street that we all
exactly.
paid for, and we pay to maintain it, all of us.
If I thought this would generate a parallel Georgia Avenue, throughway, it would give me maybe a little more heartburn. But again, there's no, people will not routinely turn off of Georgia Avenue for 2 or 3 blocks and then turn back on it. I would think that that would be pretty unlikely. But can we share the classification, what your understanding of the classification issue?
Yeah, no, I think that was just an error on staff's part. I think that the classifying it as a secondary residential street and just simply extending it to Medical Park Drive is the right way to go.
Okay. All right, comments, Andrew?
Thanks. I agree. I think the most important thing that you said is that it's a public street, not a private driveway. And when we were touring, doing our bus tour with staff and colleagues, there was 2 cars parked there seemingly permanently because there were no attendants, and they were, it appeared, at least to me, that they were being used for driving test programs. And so we were there earlier in the day, and school wasn't out yet, and I presume that most of the people who were doing their driving tests are high school students. And so it's being used as a private facility. It's being paid for with public tax dollars. I don't think that's an appropriate use of the street. And I think, to me, it's that simple. I don't think it should be contingent on other things. It either is an appropriate use for a public street or it's not. And so I strongly agree with the change in the classification, but I don't agree with putting any contingencies on it. I think we ought to just do it the right way, do it the appropriate way, do it the way that is consistent with a public street having public access, which is what it ought to be as a general rule. I did just want to raise, related to this, the signal at Medical Center Drive onto Georgia Avenue. And I do think there should be inclusion in the plan of a full movement signalized intersection there that would require eliminating median and allowing for left turns. I think one of the challenges and one of the reasons why, which I totally appreciate, Dr. Orland, the mention of the failure at Dennis and Georgia Avenue is the fact that all of the neighborhood traffic is pushed to that intersection. All of the medical center traffic is pushed to that intersection. In fact, when we went on our driving tour, we had to go back in, turn around, go all the way around to go backwards to go forwards. I mean, it's just not a really well planned out area from a transportation perspective. I think providing the full movement signalized intersection there, allowing for access would help with that. I think you can address some of the turns during certain parts of the day through other means, but it doesn't make sense for that to be a totally closed off area that requires cars to all push out. That actually hurts the neighborhood and creates a tremendous amount of congestion in the neighborhood. And I've heard from many residents that it's virtually impossible to get out of the neighborhood in the morning onto Georgia Avenue. And so I think, it's not necessarily just doing this to help other folks at the expense of the neighborhood. I think it's trying to plan this in the appropriate way in order to serve the neighborhood with a thoughtful transportation network that actually makes sense.
Can we just call for the signalized intersection regardless?
Yeah, well, I mean, like we can, there are different ways that we can do that. But yeah, I think that would not deteriorate this recommendation.
Katie, if I can ask, I know, doesn't the plan already have recommendations for specific intersections to have signals that don't have like floor
So the way
lane,
we
for
talk
example?
about it is protected intersections, because it was mostly out of a pedestrian crossing safety initiative. So we have 12 identified protected intersections we could add to that list.
But, Flora Lane, for example,
Sure.
Flora Drive, Flora Lane.
Flora Lane, yeah.
Flora.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
That, I know you do recommend a traffic signal there.
Right, but that's also because it's part of the SHA project, so
Okay.
that's already been vetted through that
Oh,
process.
okay.
But, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for more connectivity signals, and actually, this would probably also benefit the school, because it's very close to the school. The distance between Dennis Avenue and August is pretty substantial, so I think that could make a lot of sense.
I'm open to the language of whether we formally request it be studied or whatever the case may be, but I think demonstrating an indication that that's something that we would like to see. It is apparent that it's needed for a more thoughtful transportation network, as long as DOT concurs that it at least should be studied.
I think it should be a protected intersection as well, because I think, first of all traffic signals should be protected. But isn't the BRT stop heading southbound close to that intersection?
Yes, it is at Dexter, one intersection north, right
So-
across from the school. But maybe it makes more sense to go at Medical Park Drive if the traffic signal is.
Well, I'm not talking
makes
about
sense.
moving that, but you would need a way of safely
Yes.
crossing
Correct.
Georgia Avenue if you're heading
Yes.
southbound on the BRT.
It's pediatrician.
Right.
Okay. So we'll add that. Is that,
Support from my colleagues.
I'm just waiting my turn.
You're up.
I think I'm up. So as we were mentioned, I've got 2 doctors there at that medical office, as do a lot of people, and it's a hot spot. And if we're going to allow additional development, I think it should be a protected crossing. I mean, I think it makes 100% sense to do that. I had a question related to the Woodland. So one of the things that Dr. Orland mentioned was, and this is probably a DOT question, these through traffic volume access restriction plans that can be requested by these residents. Could you just explain how that works and what's the threshold? It says implemented after a public hearing if most of the affected households sign a petition. Is that a 50 plus 1? Okay. And then how often are these in requested? Are they in place? What is it? How long does it take? Could you just give me a sense of that? Or, okay, we don't. Does anyone know?
We can get the information.
Okay.
I know historically it's not that common, but it has happened over the last 25 years in several locations. Sometimes, in fact, I think probably maybe more than half the time, the effort fails because there's not enough community consensus to get 50%. The regulation requires that 50% affirmatively sign a petition being in favor of this, and sometimes it's hard to track down the property owner.
Yeah, that's a high standard.
And so that, I don't know if this is an issue that's come up elsewhere, but again, that regulation hasn't been reviewed or hasn't been updated in 25 years. So I don't know whether it's needed or not.
Considering that DOT, they're not even that aware of what it is. So I'd love to get more information about that. I agree with my colleagues. Generally, it's a public road, but I do want to be sensitive to the many residents that came in and voiced their concerns and make sure we have a full grasp of the remedies that could be available to the neighborhood should increased traffic happen as we expect it might. So, but I generally agree with my colleagues. But if DOT could just get back on that, that would be great. Thank you.
To that point, I mean, a crossing between the church and the school that is very high visibility, it would seem like it would be an essential starting point. I'm sympathetic to the idea that, hey, they might want to pull a class of third graders out to go across the street for a class. Maybe they'll change their mind and stop having classes. Who knows how they'll decide to structure things in the future, but it doesn't seem like it would be difficult for us to have a pedestrian table and, narrow lanes and pickets, like the whole treatment, the Little Falls Parkway treatment. I mean, that's totally appropriate to me. So I would absolutely want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to make that area safe. I mean, we could widen the sidewalks as well, if we're narrowing the lanes. There's a lot you can do. Okay, so I think we're in agreement about option 1.
Right. With the caveat to add explicitly in the plan a recommendation for a full movement signalized protected intersection at
Right.
Medical Park Drive in Georgia, as Mr. Friedson recommended.
All right.
Okay, the next issue I think is relatively minor. The staff draft of the plan called for a kiss and ride lot on the medical center, Forest Glen Medical Center property. This is, again, the property in the northeast quadrant of George Avenue and Forest Glen Road, where the Forest Glen Passageway tunnel comes up to the surface on the east side of Georgia. DOT calls this out saying, wait a minute, there really ought to be a kiss and ride there in the plan, and it ought to be referenced both where the plan talks about individual properties, but also in the transportation section. The final drafts plan in the urban design bullets for the Forest Glen Medical Center property does say, at the top of page 7, provide a drop-off area accessible from Woodland Drive for transit users. And the reason why it says that is the words kiss and ride implies it's a WMATA kiss and ride. And WMATA has its own standards for a minimal, for what a kiss and ride ought to be, and it might be too much for this parcel. Again, talking to staff, the property owner has no problem with having effectively a kiss and ride, a pickup drop-off area on his property. The neighbors want it to be there because they don't want informal kiss and ride happening on Woodland Drive itself.
I think WMATA requires kiss on both cheeks before the ride, and whereas Ride-On has a lower standard, but we should take that up.
I can make a further comment, but I think it would be wouldn't be appropriate for this discussion. Which cheeks? Anyway.
Humor is good. Humor is good.
I couldn't help myself. Sorry. Kill me now.
You should really have turned the other cheek on that one, Glenn.
It might be Thanksgiving, but he's here all week, folks.
So my recommendation is just to change that language in that urban design bullets to say provide an on-site, just make sure we're talking about something that's not on Woodland, on-site drop-off and pickup area for transit users that is accessible from Woodland Drive, and also to repeat that same language in an appropriate place in the transportation section. I think that.
Okay, I had a question about this. So this is the Forest Glen. Is this the private parcel or is this the?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
This is the northeast quadrant of Georgia and Forest.
So we're recommending that the private property somehow incorporate a kiss and ride. Would we pay for that?
Pickup drop-off area.
Pickup drop-off area.
Right, because when this came up before, just as Dr. Orland characterized, the property owner is very enthusiastic about incorporating the passageway into the site design and emphasizing it, and the neighbors are thrilled because then they won't maybe have to drive, but there was a concern about cars piling up either on Georgia or on Woodland Drive where people are just kind of chaotic going around. So recognizing how ride sharing is changing our landscape and how we want to anticipate that type of behavior, we would like to encourage that there's some sort of pickup and drop off that is incorporated into the design.
And I would just note, and maybe we'd even want to add this, that could certainly count towards public benefit points as part of an optional method project.
Okay. I mean, is it a requirement here, or is this an option that you will consider?
You know, I think it is a strong master plan recommendation. When a development review case comes in, we will try to make sure to implement all of the strong master plan recommendations. But I do think something like this, which is on private land, should count towards public benefit points because they are providing a public benefit.
All right. I mean, I've just never heard of this before, requiring property owners to provide kiss and rides for metro stations that are half-mile away. Seems right. Isn't that the?
Right across the street.
No, this is the property right
where the
across
tunnel
the
will
street
come out?
from the metro.
Oh, sorry.
Medical center property.
Forest Glen Medical
Right,
Center.
where the new
not
sign
the-
is today.
Not the Forest Glen, not the.
Not Dennis
Not the
Avenue.
Dennis Avenue.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a lot.
That makes sense.
And the
All
other thing,
right.
too, to emphasize, I mean, so when we were talking about this, we just wanted to make it very clear that we want this to be accessed off of Woodland Drive and not off of Georgia
Okay.
Avenue. Like, that's really where we were splitting the hairs before.
Now I get it.
Okay.
Makes sense. Good idea.
Do you want to add the language that Ms. Wright was suggesting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. The next issue is access to the Forest Glen Metro Station from the northwest quadrant, which is the Americana Finmark. You heard from the Board of Directors in their testimony, Americana Finmark, that right now, if you're living in Finmark, you have to, if you don't want to cross a road and get to the metro station, you have to walk west along the north side of Forest Glen Road, sort of past the metro station, all the way to the point where the entrance to the Kiss and Ride lot begins, and then walk back several hundred feet to
Yeah.
where the tunnel begins, and then you take the tunnel underneath Forest Glen Road to go into the lobby of the elevator lobby at the metro station. That's a distance of about 1,300 feet. And of course, if you're living further north in Americana Finmark, it's even longer. The final draft reads, "This plan confirms and supports the funded project," and they're referring here to the passageway, and recommends detailed considerations for the final design stage, which includes locations for additional elevators on Forest Glen Road, west of Georgia Avenue. Consult the transportation appendix. The appendix talks about two possibilities for this, for what this language says. One is another elevator on right at the northwest corner of Georgia and Forest Glen. The problem with that is it's really not feasible because there are vent shafts there from the metro station which take up the space. The other possibility in the technical appendix is to put it, again, on the north side of Georgia Avenue, Forest Glen Road, but at the point where the underpass, the existing underpass from the Kiss and Ride lot into the elevator lobby exists. That's about a distance of about 500 feet as opposed to 1,300 feet. It still doesn't bring you into the elevator lobby. It gets you down to that underpass, then you have to walk underneath Forest Glen Road to go into the lobby, but it gets you there. We're trying to bring it up on the screen. It's over here. Are you doing that? Oh, Katie's doing it. All right. Sure, of course. So, Katie, can you just sort of like, by using the cursor, point out the two movements we're talking about? Okay, that's the northwest corner. And then if they want to go today to the metro station and not have to cross the road at all, they go all the way down to there, and then double back to there, and then take the underpass sort of at a southwesterly direction out to the near the intersection of Coleridge and Forest Glen, where the lobby is, a little further off to the south side. If you put the elevator where the underpass is, and point out where that is, Katie, if you would.
So right over here,
No, the other, on the north side.
on this side?
No, on the northwest side. The other elevator site you were talking about
that
in the
we're recommending,
technical.
okay, so we have one here, and then we have one recommended
Okay,
here.
that second one is the one that's feasible,
Because it's by the stairs.
because it's right by the stairs. And that way, the distance is only 500 feet from that corner, as opposed to 1,300 feet. There's already going to be, according to the at least preliminary designs of the passageway, an elevator there, where Katie's pointing, which is right by the steps that go down to the elevator lobby at the southeast corner of Forest Glen and Coleridge, as well as in the northeast corner that we talked about, which is the Forest Glen Medical Center property. So you're already going to have two. You're going to have one on each side of Georgia Avenue. My recommendation really is that you don't put any more elevators in than just these two. These elevators, they're exposed to the elements. They're notoriously hard to maintain. They're expensive. And this is an area which does not and will not have a tremendous amount of walk access, people wanting to walk to it. It's just not that dense an area, even with the planned development. For example, the biggest planned development is on top of the Kiss and Ride on the west side there, and they have ready access to the underpass now, or will have ready access to the underpass. So my recommendation is just to include the following language, which is on the sort of near the top of page 8. This plan confirms and supports the funded project, again, that's the Forest Glen Passageway, and recommends detailed considerations for the final design stage, which includes the location for an elevator on the south side of Forest Glen Road near the existing steps into the station lobby, which is the one I pointed out.
That's where we're almost pointing right now.
No,
It's across the street.
Katie?
It's the existing one, right?
Point where the elevator would be at the southeast corner of Coleridge and Forest Glen. It would be there, Mr. Gelano. So what would happen is if you were living in Fenmark, you would come down along Georgia Avenue and cross Forest Glen Road at grade, and you did it on the tour. It's not a big deal. And then you could walk along the south side of Forest Glen Road to that elevator. That's actually only 300 feet. That's even a shorter distance
Can
than
I
the
have a
500 feet.
threshold question here? What about also a connection from the Americana Fenmark on the north side of that parking lot? I mean, when I'm there at the Forest Glen Metro, I see a lot of people walking on the north side of that parking lot. Where are they coming from, and does Americana Fenmark connect to that?
No. So surrounding the Americana Fenmark development is a fence. There's a bit of a gray difference between the service lot and the Kiss and Ride. There could be a feasible break in the fence right here, because you actually see a People's Choice path that comes right in between these trees that comes out here and down to the stairs. If Americana Fenmark wants to work something out with WMATA where they open the fence and have some sort of key fob or whatever, that's fine.
Because the development is going to be happening right there as
Right.
well.
Right.
Yeah,
It's going to be, the opportunity, I was going to raise that, the opportunity is with the new.
your mic is not on.
I say the opportunity is with the new development. I think the greatest opportunity is with a new development that could be worked out between the new developer of the WMATA parcel and Americana Finmark
Right.
in order to do this.
Right,
I mean-
because my concern is that this is not penetrable, so I don't really want to emphasize in a master plan just a connection to Americana Finmark when they don't provide access to the greater network, if that makes sense. So if they want to do it on their own, that's completely fine.
And there's other multifamily around there that can't get through either.
Exactly.
Yes. I mean, that's a good point.
Right, so like, yeah, if you're in the Belvedere, you have to come all the
I
way.
mean, we are talking about someone walking not only from Americana Finmark, but also Forest Glen Apartments, just north or something
Right.
like that. But pretty soon you would actually have the alternative of heading on the interior streets as your access strategy. And so, anyway, just a threshold for me has been, why doesn't Americana Finmark have another connection? I'm sure there's an explanation, but I'd like to know.
There is an opening on the gate on the side that I do see people come.
Informal, right? Like, it's not like a
Informally
nice,
there.
like, door. But yeah. The only other reason why we also consider this as well is that this bus stop has some pretty high activity. So there are people that are using the Y7 and the other Y routes as well that are coming off, and they're trying to access the metro. And also, there's a planned BRT station right at this
Right.
intersection. So those were our thoughts.
I mean, it's definitely something where it would be good to improve the efficiency of the connection from that corner to the metro. And to the extent that we're creating pedestrian connections, we need to create ADA accessible pedestrian
Right.
connections. And that will be also addressed, I suppose, in the site plan to some extent, potentially for the development.
That was our expectation.
That was your expectation?
But I think what Dr. Orland's saying is that you can, even from that bus stop, go down, cross
Right.
the street,
And then you're at the metro.
make a turn,
At the-
and go to where there will be a new elevator right where the cursor is.
And that would save you 1,000 feet, give or take, from the intersection. So 1,300 feet, it would be about 300 feet, right? Which
would
is
also just be more
significant, a
Yeah.
significant improvement for walkability and access.
Absolutely.
Okay. Comments? Your light is on?
I support the staff recommendation.
All right. Also?
I do as well.
All right. I think we're all agreed on that.
Okay, the next point is just one of the things we always look at in master plans last couple of years is public school adequacy. And all I've done in this next, I won't go through the details of this, but basically looking at the projected student generation from the new development and adding that to what's forecast in the year 2034, which is the latest forecast from the school system, at each of the three levels, high school, middle school, and elementary school serving this area. There are deficits. However, there are plenty of opportunities, ready opportunities to meet that demand. And the only test here for master plans is are there plausible options for meeting that demand? And this does. I'll just say in passing, and Jason is here as well. What did I say James in?
Jason.
You
got it
I
right
got
that
it
time.
right.
Sure,
For years
for
I
the
kept
record,
calling you
Jason
James.
Sartori. Or Josh. Something with a J.
I never called you Josh. I'm sorry. Jason, yeah, I got it right. There's a table in the attachments here, which basically shows that if you end up approving the board's recommendation for, the school board's recommendation for the CIP, the superintendents, I should say, the board hasn't confirmed it yet, but they will, then there won't be any areas in moratorium at the high school level as of July 1st. And there's only a couple of areas, a couple of individual areas, school service areas that will. So, but not in this area. So basically, the public school adequacy test is met.
Is that your sartorial recommendation?
My sartorial recommendation? Oh, my God.
Jason, any
I'm
other
going to use
thing
that
to
from
add
now
there?
on.
I have nothing to add.
What can you add to that? And then finally, just noting the executive is required to file a fiscal impact statement. That's attached as well. The cost that they attribute to the county is $162.5 million, most of that for transportation improvements, and some part of it for the proportional cost of new school capacity, which is already being programmed. Most of the increases, most of the transportation improvements are dealt with in these 4 bullets: the George Avenue South BRT, at least this section of it within this planning area, the Forest Glen Passageway, which we've talked about, the Woodland Drive Bikeway Breezeway, which is the whole length of Woodland in this planning area, which is quite long, and a whole series of sidewalk improvements. There's some assumptions in here as to whether things should be split between the county and the state or just the county. There's nothing you have to approve here. They're just a matter of how you characterize it. I would think that, at least under the current state administration, they basically told us that we're on our own for BRT, that we shouldn't look for any state money for that. We're going to keep pushing for that, and maybe the next administration will be more amenable to it. And this is a master plan that's supposed to last for 20, 30 years. But the assumption today that the state would pick up half the cost of the BRT is probably not accurate, at least not with this administration.
Okay.
But it's just, the information is there. That's all I'll really say about it.
All right.
And with that, I'm done, unless you have anything else.
No, that's
for
good.
me.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Glenn. Let's move on. Pam, you're up.
Good morning. So this morning, we are going to be covering some of the elements in the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills sector plan, the ones that are not transportation, as they've just been covered, and not the recommendations related to land use and zoning. Those are going to be covered on December 2nd. But what we are going to cover are recommendations that are sort of in the middle of the plan, the urban design, historic preservation, the historic preservation that are not specific to a specific property. Those are going to get covered with land use. Recommendations related to the environment, and parks, trails, and open space. To give you a little background, though, I just wanted to mention that the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills plan covers approximately 230 acres, and it's centered along a 2-mile stretch of Georgia Avenue, as you've been discussing this morning, between Dennis Avenue and down to Spring Street near downtown Silver Spring. It's composed predominantly of commercial development along Georgia Avenue, but this is intermixed with garden apartments, townhouses, religious institutions, and single-family detached homes. Just over half the residents of the study area are non-Hispanic whites at 52%, with African Americans representing 20% of the area residents, Hispanics and Asians representing 16 and 7% respectively. The median household income is $125,000+, which is slightly lower than the countywide average, although income in this area is highly diverse. Also in the study area, it is marked by a high degree of education, with 40% of the population over 25 holding a graduate or professional degree, compared with 31% countywide. So it gives you a little context for the study area and who it represents. The vision of the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills sector plan is to leverage existing and future infrastructure improvements within the plan area to facilitate the creation of safe, interconnected Georgia Avenue. The plan utilizes 3 themes to do this: reconnect, reimagine, and reinvest. And the plan offers recommendations that are designed to encourage equitable, attractive development, provide for housing choices at all economic levels, improve connectivity, and enhance ecological function and open space. As you've heard, Dr. Orland, he covered the transportation recommendations proposed under the Reconnect section and the school facility information under Reimagine, and this report will cover the remaining recommendations under Reimagine. So we are going to, like I said, cover urban design, historic preservation, environment, parks, trails, and open space. On pages 49 and 50, you have some urban design recommendations. To support the unique identity of the plan area, the sector plan establishes 2 principal goals related to urban design. The first is to encourage quality design that incorporates neighborhood compatibility and sustainable development practices, and the second is to enhance the public realm by providing green infrastructure that meets the needs of all users. Several recommendations are described on pages 49 and 50. and they're proposed to achieve these goals. There was no testimony received in relationship to these recommendations, and staff supports the recommendations as drafted in the plan.
Okay. I just want to make one overarching comment about urban design in this context, which is the utilities. If there's like one thing I hear from people there, it's the need to somehow get those utilities undergrounded as you're coming up Georgia Avenue. And like, what a visual blight it creates for the community. And I don't get the sense that it's something that, you know, it's a project that's bigger than any one property owner. But if we don't address it, you know, if we can address it, I think everything that we do here is going to be, the benefits will be doubled. If we can't address it, then it's just going to, it's going to limit our achievement. So
It is the last recommendation under the urban design section, so it lands on page 15. It is to underground or relocate all utilities.
Yeah.
It could be more prominent. It could just be moved,
Well,
earlier in that
I mean,
list.
I just think
or-
the expense of it is
Yeah.
something that it's much more significant than a small thing. And if we really want it to happen, I think it has to be a priority for public benefits, for other exactions, and even then, it's probably just a contribution,
Right.
rather than actually doing it. It's just really complicated.
Well, it's ridiculously expensive,
Yeah.
and you're alluding to that. Another problem is that some of the places where it's got the most egregious aesthetic impact are on properties that are unlikely to redevelop. So, you can say whatever you want in the plan. If there's no public money, it's probably not going to happen. Potentially, if SHA completely redesigns Georgia Avenue, if they wind up moving the curb, maybe you've got a shot.
I mean,
you've got a shot there.
I think it's consistent with 5B, right? I think if you do 5B, it's possible, Katie's going to maybe help us understand, that it could be done, although the state won't pay for it, most likely.
So I think everyone would ideally like to have the utilities underground. It just makes everything easier in the long run after it's done. The problem is, I think, given what we have seen of SHA's preliminary plans, it's more likely that they're going to relocate the utilities because now they're going to provide a buffer to the pedestrian network than they are to underground it because of the expense.
Right.
Although if they move the poles, that's a huge.
I mean, that's much of the expense. I mean, I think we have a chance in the context of
Maybe
the
you could at least get
5B
them to clean it up.
plan to go to the table and say, we got to get this done.
Right. Well, and also,
To that extent, I think it would be helpful if we consider the development in this area as contributing toward the cost of that, even if it comes down the road.
Well, you could include as a priority public benefit contribution toward undergrounding utilities, but I don't think, it seems pretty unlikely that the scale of these projects is such that even asking them to do that as their only public benefit might turn out to be a deal breaker. So,
I don't know. I mean, I think it
wouldn't say
probably-
anything. Yeah, well, I guess what I'm suggesting is putting it in at a high level of generality, contribution towards as a priority public benefit, and then we can try to figure it
Well,
out
I think
from there.
certainly one thing, it relates to what we're about to get into, which is other requirements that we put on property.
Yeah.
And how we're balancing all these things out. So let's talk about that.
Okay. So moving on to page 50, we do have historic preservation in a broad section. The plan currently does not contain any sites or districts that are listed in the master plan for historic preservation. However, the Woodside District is listed in the locational atlas and index of historic sites.
Is the Woodside District in the boundary of this plan?
It abuts it.
It abuts it.
Yeah.
And that's the district where it's an historic district, but you get no tax credit, which is like the weirdest combination.
Right now, it is not a designated historic district.
Okay, but you still have to go
It is an
to get a
area
permit.
that should be considered for historic designation.
Okay.
And that's, I think the plan is essentially saying continue to that process of considering it.
No, we're not changing that one today.
Right.
But I just have always said, I don't understand why folks have to get a historic permit there, but they get no tax break. It is a strange combination. Yeah, all the downside,
This
none of the
constituent
upside.
wants to know.
Maybe the planning chairman, once he's retired, will
picking up some solar panels, I want to know.
Right.
The plan does list several broad goals and 2 area-wide recommendations with respect to historic preservation. The goals are principally to encourage the future identification and potential designation of historic resources and sites, which Director Wright just spoke to. And within the plan area, the goals support the preservation of all historic resources, designated or not. The second goal that's listed, though, is to encourage the utilization of historic preservation tax credit program for the restoration and preservation of county-designated historic properties, which is forward-thinking, given that there aren't designated properties today, but we're hoping that in the future, through a different process, those might be designated. Again, since this is something that is more of actionable, it seems to me it would be better suited as a recommendation than a goal, but that's just a minor point. But there is another goal called safeguard the historical and cultural heritage of the county, which seems to go beyond the scope of this plan, and perhaps we could just change county to plan area, since that seems to be more appropriate. And I just want to, with respect to the broader historic preservation goals, no testimony was
Was that
received.
a typo there? To safeguard the historic character of the county?
Melissa Williams, for the record, I just heard from our historic preservation.
No, it's, yes, it was a typo. Right, thank you, thank you.
We'll change it to plan area.
It's not really a typo, it was just, somehow it wasn't, didn't make, it made sense when it was recommended, but now, okay.
And as I mentioned, though, we will address some of the property-specific considerations for historic preservation as we do the land use and zoning, simply because we did receive some testimony on that, but it's probably more appropriate to talk about those on a locational basis as we look at each property during the land use and zoning discussion on the 2nd.
Sorry. All right. So the first proposal is to change the second goal to a recommendation.
Move it to the recommendation column.
And the second goal, again, Pam, is
It's
county, oh. yeah.
Recommending tax credits
Yes.
be used.
We already agreed.
Yeah. Okay. So the committee's okay with both of the recommendations for historic preservation?
Are we encouraging the utilization, but there is no district in here. Are we encouraging it for the,
I think given that there are, I think, around 7 goals for historic preservation. There's only 2 recommendations, but the goals really speak to future designations.
but
And
what
so,
would that be? I mean,
if the master plan of historic preservation were reviewed countywide, that could make recommendations for any part of the county, and it could bring forward some of these areas.
I mean, I think a language that would help would be something that would say, if in the future any sites are designated as historic, encourage the utilization of the historic preservation tax credit.
It's fine, too.
what are we talking about here?
It's a general recommendation.
As a recommendation or a
Yes,
goal?
as a
recommendation.
recommendation.
But there is no property in here that we have identified as
Nothing is
recommended
designated at this time.
or
I'd
recommended
be
for
fine with
designation.
that. I think the broader question was whether we go from a goal to a recommendation, which has slightly different implications.
All right. Sorry.
And we have no problem with it as a recommendation.
Well-
That's fine.
My question was related to, were there any sites that almost made the list? And maybe you could come down, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but
Rebecca Ballo is our historic preservation supervisor, and there are actually several properties that are identified, which she can talk about for future evaluation.
thank you, Ms.
Good morning, Rebecca Ballo for the record. Again, I'm the Historic Preservation Supervisor. As part of this plan, our office has not formally undertaken the research and the survey work to determine whether or not the master plan for historic preservation should have been amended concurrently with this sector plan to actually make a recommendation about any of the sites for master plan status or for master plan district status in regards to Woodside. The recommendations that are in there are very broad now, anticipating that in the future, if some of the sites that we've identified, which we can talk about at the subsequent PHED committee meeting were brought forward, that they would already be identified in the plan.
Okay, so if I paraphrase, we haven't done the work to know where there might be opportunity yet.
We have done, again, some of the work. For example, an SHA Georgia Avenue corridor study that was done in 2012, 2013 made recommendations about National Register eligibility for certain properties, one of the churches on Georgia Avenue, and so we have put that into the sector plan merely as a placeholder, but our office hasn't done the work yet. That is correct.
Got it. Okay.
What is the difference between a goal and a recommendation?
Well, goals, in my opinion, are broader. They're aspirational. They're where you want to achieve, like, through the life of the plan. Typically, recommendations, especially when we see them related to properties, or in the case of master plans, they're implemented through the approval process typically. They're things that can be done as a plan is approved. And so for me, seeing that the tax credits is at a recommendation, because as something comes through, if it's eligible for tax credits, staff could encourage the use of that. It's sort of the distinction between recommendations or things that we can act on more quickly.
An example of those you mentioned, could you just point out an example of one of these places that showed up on the registry? I'm just trying to get a sense of what was identified as potential. I know you went over
So
to
Rebecca,
okay.
why don't you just describe a few of the sites, and Melissa can show them
I'm just
on the
curious
map.
about what we're talking
They
about.
are going to be discussed in greater detail at your next work session.
Okay. then we
Let's
can-
not,
we don't
let's
have to
not
go
do it
down that
today.
road then.
And we're only discussing the difference between a goal and a recommendation for these potential properties.
I'm fine with either. It seems fine with me the way it's stated, but I defer to my colleagues.
I would tend to keep it more aspirational. When you say as stated, you mean in the plan, or?
Yeah, it doesn't seem. Which recommendation do you guys have an issue with?
No, it's the question of a goal versus a recommendation. I thought I heard the planning director say that planning would be perfectly comfortable with the change from goal to recommendation,
think
and
this
offered
is-
some broad language, which I would be
All
comfortable
a
with.
distinction without a difference. in
I
my
think,
opinion.
I think as Ms. Dunn mentioned, a recommendation is something that's sort of maybe actionable in the short term. There are some properties here, for example, as Rebecca Bala just mentioned, that have been deemed National Register eligible. They, if they renovated, might want to make use of federal historic preservation tax credits, not just the county historic preservation tax credits. They don't have to be designated by the county
But
to
none
make
of the
use of
property
tax
owners
credits.
need this language to say goal or recommendation in order to
Correct.
do any of that.
No, it's just a point, I think, to show that these resources are available.
I think more information for showing resources is great, so I'm fine with your recommendation to adjust it slightly. Ms. Wright.
Agreed.
Fine.
Okay, so I'll have the committee supporting that and the change from county to plan area on the fourth recommendation. We'll move into environment. The Montgomery Hills Forest Glen Plan proposes the following 3 environmental goals: to create solutions to improve ecological health and well-being of the community, and seek to eliminate disproportionate environmental burdens; 2, to mitigate the past environmental impacts and protect against future ecological degradation; and 3, enhance the public realm by providing green infrastructure that meets the needs of all users. The third environmental goal, if you'll note, is the same as the second urban design goal. To achieve these goals, the plan provides numerous environmental recommendations separated into 3 categories. We have green cover, water quality, and air quality and carbon emissions as one category. The plan recommends improving green cover through planted roofs, trees, bioretention systems, planting beds, and lawns. More specifically, for properties greater than 2.5 acres in size, with the potential for redevelopment under the CRT zone, the plan requires a minimum of 35% green cover. In your packet, you'll see a list of properties that would be affected by a 35% requirement in the amount
So
of green cover.
what does this mean, 35% green cover? Does it literally mean 35% of the
What it
property is
means-
unbuildable?
No. What it means is that at the time of development review, we would try to assure that 35% of the land is permeable in some way, pervious in some way. That could be a green roof. It could be the open space that's already required. It could be the tree planting. In fact, there is an image on, let's see, what page is that, Melissa? On page 51 of your plan that shows a, example of how a strip shopping center could achieve 35% green cover. And it absolutely does not mean that 35% of the land is not usable. I think what's really important, and just to be a little philosophical for a minute, one of the biggest issues we have in climate change right now is how we're managing the stormwater with all of the huge rain events that we're having. We're all seeing the effects of it, the flooding that happens constantly. And the reason that happens is because a lot of our areas are 100% impervious. And we have to move, just as we have in the Up County, moved to trying to limit imperviousness on new greenfields developments, we have to look in the Down County as we're retrofitting older areas. We have to figure out how to create some perviousness. And so this, another way of looking at this is saying this is 65, this allows 65% impervious.
I don't understand why we go beyond the green building code, why we go beyond the stormwater rules. We already have the
I
strictest
should say
stormwater
for-
rules you'll find anywhere, and you want to add up on that on a property that is so
I can
on
tell
the
you-
on the margin for its ability to redevelop.
Yes, and I think the planning board did not intend to go beyond what was in Bethesda. Certainly, we agree that we should try to push for more sustainable development, but we did not intend to go beyond what was in the Bethesda plan, and I thought we'd cleaned that up, but.
Even
I was-
that, I mean,
It is a recommendation,
Bethesda-
not a requirement.
Yeah.
Bethesda, you can imagine the ability to absorb, higher requirements. I think this is so murky as to whether any of this is ever going to happen.
Yeah, well,
And the
I think
more
it's-
we lard up on it, the
And
less
I would
likely
s-
it becomes.
And I would suggest, as we talked about this at the planning board when we were drafting the plan, that if the county wants to adopt, and maybe it should, adopt a higher standard for things like green cover or standards about green roofs in particular, that we should do that on a countywide
Right,
basis.
exactly.
But I don't think, having said that I think what Gwen said is right. You can get more green cover than you would think, even in a
Well, you
less
can, but
intensive
someone's got
kind
to
of
pay for it. And we want to underground utilities. We want to have big setbacks from the street. We want to do all these things, and then we wonder why we don't get any development, why their housing is ground to a halt.
So I would point you to Circle 1, and I think what I just heard the chair say is that they really did intend this as a recommendation. My confusion was with the language on the top of page 51, where it does mention providing minimum of 35% green cover for properties over 2.5 acres, because it goes on to say, for smaller properties, there's no minimum green cover requirement. It uses the word requirement, implying that what it has just suggested is in fact a requirement. But if you look at Circle 1, this is the summary of recent master plans, how these two primary things under environment have been recommended, green cover and soil volume, that we'll get to in a minute. In Bethesda, yes, in fact, it is a recommendation.
But Bethesda, there was a very present recognition that Bethesda has the highest real estate values probably in all of Montgomery County, and that everything we did was, based on that. And suddenly now we're hearing Bethesda is the new standard for everywhere?
No, I don't think that's what we're saying. I'm going to let Tina Schneider just address this briefly, but I will tell you, this is an issue that's going to come up as part of the general plan. Also, one of our biggest issues is the level we have of imperviousness from an environmental standpoint.
Understood, but
forget
don't we
about tree
capture-
canopy, forget about all of those things. If we change anything to
Understood,
affect climate
but-
change, it's the imperviousness.
Well, understood, but the worst-case scenario is that these properties don't redevelop, because that does nothing for imperviousness. So if the status quo is the biggest enemy, not some kind of change, any change is better than the status quo
Well, you know,
from a
again,
climate change perspective.
I agree completely. The thing that we would say is if you don't set out an aspiration in your master plan, then you do end up with zero.
But you don't end up
And
with zero, you end up with our strict
Well, you end up
stormwater
with a
requirements and our
very-
green building code.
limited amount, and all of those things play into that 35%. So let Tina say a few words.
Could Pam just finish her sentence and then Tina, because she was
Okay,
saying
I
something.
was going to point you to Circle 31, and it really does get to the difference between a recommendation and a requirement. My reading of the plan was that it was being put forward as a requirement, which I thought was a significant change. Bethesda had been a recommendation, and the language in the plan clearly states that. Then I reviewed projects that had been applied for in Bethesda, and basically found that for almost all of them, they're trying very hard to achieve this 35%
Right.
and are able to say that they will make it. We do have two that, for whatever reasons, find it too challenging. One was approved at a 32.5% green cover, and that's the difference between a requirement and a recommendation.
Where they
Master
get, by
plan-
the way, a lot of height also in Bethesda,
Right.
get hundreds of feet even, if you want it. You know, we're not talking about anything like that here.
But I just want to emphasize that master plan recommendations, they hold a lot of weight. The planning board looks at them very strenuously when they go to approve an application. And where it's a recommendation but not a requirement, they do have that flexibility. When a project comes forward and it can't meet it, they can say, well, you meet the intent of the plan if you've done the best you can.
So here, it's a recommendation, aspirational goal, in
Okay.
light of everything that you've said. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Tina Schneider, Area 1 Planning. So I just want to state that we're not trying to burden any developers in the slightest. What we're trying to do is create greener communities, but that actually enhance the community overall. So we know that when a site has green cover in it, it provides 30% more economic value to a site. The recommendations are for sites that are 2.5 acres or larger. And in Bethesda, they're much smaller and they're getting it. So on a larger footprint, we're going to have more open space, more
Rooftop is-
opportunities.
Yeah, I mean,
Pardon
you
me?
get 290 feet and you put a green roof on the rooftop, you're covering a sizable share of your parcel.
Right, but not all of the green roof is actually quantified as covering green cover because a lot
Oh.
of it is open space also. So people are putting amenities on the roof. So they're using a combination of stormwater, they're using a combination of their landscaping, combination of their lawns, a combination of green cover, and we want the same thing. It also creates climate resilience. It's really important to think about these green communities, green locations as resilience.
So I think, again, if we do this as a recommendation, the idea really is that we're trying to set an aspiration. It may be as we go through the development review process with these projects, and they are only the properties that are 2.5 acres or larger in this particular plan area, that we don't end up achieving that aspirational goal, but we try for it. And I think that's what we're trying to communicate and get across.
I think that's fine. I just, the Forest Glen Metro site has not been developed since its beginning, which is, from a climate perspective, an abomination. And we have to be sure that we do not then say, we draw so many pretty pictures that we make it impossible, to actually undo the abomination in the first place. And I think that applies not only to the Metro site, but to the strip centers and so forth. Like, our goal is to create transit-oriented development where people don't have to drive, because that is one of the most important things we can do from a climate perspective. Let's just keep our eyes on the ball and not assume that all that happens and everything else is just gravy. It doesn't happen by itself. Casey?
Well, here's my suggestion. We had a similar discussion at the planning board, and and where we came down was the larger sites would get the additional language and the smaller sites wouldn't. But I definitely, the planning board was coming from a point of view that's very consistent with what you're saying. My suggestion would be that if you're still concerned about these large sites, that you could say something, add some other softening language that would just say that the economic practicability of the green cover requirements has to be weighed against other important objectives for the site, including whether or not you can redevelop at all, underground utilities, other priorities.
Well, I think it's satisfactory as recommendation, but, Will?
Thank you. So I am 100% fine with the language. I think we should leave it the way it is. I think you struck a good balance. I think the point that staff made that we're achieving this on even smaller parcels in Bethesda, and because, to use the, since abomination when used, I'll use another biblical term. We want to avoid the biblical floods like Ellicott City and places where, just the costs for that. And I really believe with all once we're done with this plan, this area is a highly desirable place to live and work and be. And with everything happening on Georgia Avenue, SHA really in the mix with the proposed development, I think this is, we're not going to have trouble. Even the meetings I've already had, whether it's Snyder's or whatever, people want to redevelop. There's going to be action happening here. So I think we want to set that aspirational goal. 2.5 acres was, I think, the right balance. I would not want to add any softening language. I think we should leave it where it is, would be my recommendation to my colleagues. Thank you.
Will, Andrew?
Thanks. So I think we've kind of twisted ourselves a bit into a pretzel here. The original intention here was to make it aspirational, and this question of whether it was a requirement or a recommendation. That was my understanding of what the staff recommendation is. I think there's universal support, it sounds like, that was the intent of the document and of the plan as proposed by the planning board, and that is the intention here. I think the question is, so I strongly support that, and I think there's no, in order not to find conflict from the jaws of consensus, I just want to make sure we put that out there. If we were to include language, as the chair of the planning board had mentioned, to have this as a goal for all properties, especially larger sites, without being as prescriptive as 2.5 acres when practicable to achieve, in addition to the other goals of the plan, I'd be comfortable with language like that. I'd also be comfortable just changing it from a requirement to a recommendation and allowing the planning board to do what its job is and what it has demonstrated that it can do, as has been evidenced in Bethesda, where this was a recommendation and folks are achieving it. I do concur with many of the things that Chair Reamer mentioned about that this isn't Bethesda, that we aren't talking about 200 and 290-foot buildings, that some of the opportunities to create the green space and make up for it in the density don't exist here. But I think, my view of this is that's the role of the planning board and the site plan approval to figure out the context on a case-by-case basis, have an overarching plan of having green cover, of doing environmental resilience, which we all know that we desperately need, and recognize the fact that turning parking lots, impervious parking lots, into new developments provide tremendous amount of environmental benefits, and we want to make that as attractive as possible and make sure that we're setting our aspirational goals through recommendations more so than requirements.
All right, so it'll be a recommendation, not a requirement.
Okay.
I think we're all agreed.
Okay, it will take just a little tweaking of the current planning board draft language to make sure that that's clear, that's all. There's language that alludes to a requirement, and that's all that would need to be cleaned up.
All right, so you'll send that around?
Of course. The next piece of this under the environment green cover recommendation has to do with soil volumes. And in, again, trying to research and figure out, like, what is typical, what have we done in plans, how often does a master plan make a recommendation related to this regulation? Again, on Circle 1, you'll see there's a list of the prior recently approved master plans where there's a recommendation for green cover, where there's a recommendation for soil volume. That's on Circle 1. If you turn to Circle 2, then there's some more information regarding soil volume. The plan recommends that soil volumes for canopy trees be no less than 800 to 1,000 cubic feet. there is a graphic that shows soil volumes for trees of different size. You have small, medium, and large trees. They do require different cubic feet of area to grow healthy trees. There's no debating that needing the right soil volume to have healthy canopy trees is not extremely important. It is. The one thing that this marries with are these street cross-sections. And so what we have in the plan are numerous street cross-sections where we have tree planting widths of 6 feet. In looking online to see as many different types of standards for these tree plantings, it appeared that the standard, this industry standard for depth is of 3 feet. If you multiply 3 feet by a 6-foot minimum planting width, which we've got a very crowded right-of-way to fit that 6-foot tree planting strip in, and we've got another recommendation from the planning board that the length of that planting strip be no greater than 35 feet, so that's as big as it can get, because they want the trees closer together. You're really talking about a soil volume of 630 feet. So to have a requirement for 800 cubic feet doesn't necessarily match what's in the streetscape recommendations. I just don't know if there's any internal inconsistency in the plan to require, so no other master plans have recommended 800 cubic feet. The other two that did make a recommendation in Lintonsville and Bethesda were 600. That seems to work very well with a minimum 6-foot wide tree planting strip in our street cross sections. So my recommendation would just be to change the 800 to 600. If you want to add language that those minimums should be applicable or tied well to the size of the tree that's being planted. I mean, again, here, 6-foot minimum planting width, it's doubt that you're going to get one of the largest trees. But
Okay, all right, that's fine, recommendation, I think that's fine. Andrew?
I was just going to say, I think it should be consistent with the other plans as we've done. I don't think setting a new standard for Forest Glen, Montgomery Hills is appropriate here, and I think Georgia Avenue, to the point of staff, similar to Wisconsin Avenue where Bethesda was. I mean, I don't see the difference there, or that this be the right venue to make a significant change. So I would make it consistent with the other master plans as have been recently adopted by the council.
And that's fine. The only thing I would note for you is that there's an existing Montgomery County tree protection law that requires 800 cubic feet for unrestricted and unshared soil space. And I was just having Tina look it up.
Why is it in the plan then? If there's a law.
Well, that's also different. So that is, you're talking about preservation. This is going to be different than when we're redeveloping Georgia Avenue. Those won't be necessarily preserved trees, because I don't really think there's trees there today. This is going to be about planting new trees. You also said it was unrestricted and I mean, if it applies to an area where, again, you're not getting redevelopment in the cross-section of bike lanes, pedestrian walkways, and lanes of traffic, that may be a different environment where that regulation is really deemed to be applicable. And that might be a parking lot with an existing tree, but that is very different than trying to get street trees matched up to what these requirements are when we're putting requirements in a plan.
Maybe Tina can just explain what the law is and give you the actual reference.
Yeah, that was what I asked. Well, and in addition to explaining that, just what else went into this 800 recommendation? And I'm all for doing more and setting trends. I think if it makes sense, and I just want to understand more about why. In addition.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. So I'm going to just talk momentarily about why. So why?
First, talk about the law.
Okay, first about the law. So the Montgomery County has the tree protection law and also planting requirements. And so under ideal circumstances, under ideal conditions, we want a minimum of like 800 to more. Casey Trees Foundation has documents right now that go all the way up from 1,000 cubic feet all the way up to 1,800 cubic feet. Department of Transportation for DC District of Columbia, their minimum is 1,500. NASHCO, which is the National Association for Transportation Officials, they've come out with 1,000 cubic feet. And the reason why these are changing is because we have changed, our temperatures are changing. We're getting these extreme heat days, and we're going to be getting more of them due to climate change. And trees are under a lot of stress, and we all know that they're dying. They're dying rapidly. And why are they dying? Because they, either too much water, too little water, not enough soil to hold them in place. So what DC is doing in all redevelopments is there's something called silva cells. So it's not just, as Pam had described, a cube. What they're doing, okay, the cube is only going to be big enough for 600 cubic feet. The cube is being expanded underneath the sidewalk so that the soil can go, and what they are like crates. And so you fill the crate under the sidewalk. And so that just creates for healthier trees. And so that's the future, is to try to get
So you
livable.
saw this as an opportunity to anticipate the challenges we're facing in climate change and make it a higher standard going forward. So this wouldn't just be exclusive to this plan. If this would probably be
No.
going forward, we'd be looking more at 800.
Trying to preempt climate change right now because
Yeah.
ecosystems are under a lot of stress.
Well, and that's why the law that exists that Tina was mentioning is at 800. Again, we have put 600 in previous plans, but it doesn't mean we can't get smarter.
Yeah, I'd agree. And
I think this should be a county-wide rule.
Yeah. Could I?
An ordinance.
I was still going here a little bit. I just wanted to say that I agree with the rationale, and I think this is where you do it. You can always say, I want it to be countywide, and we should do it the way we've always done it, but that's not why we're here, and things are changing rapidly, and why not have a countywide review? But I think this would be a good place to start. We certainly did things in Veers Mill that we haven't done before, as far as Vision Zero and safety, and did other things, and that's so. I'm for the 800 as is stated in the plan.
All right, well, I think we have a committee recommendation for 600, consistent with existing master plans, including Bethesda.
2-1. I think you got that though, Pam. Okay.
Got it, thank you. The plan provides recommendations related to water quality as well. It makes several recommendations about environmental site design, stormwater management to promote improved treatment of water runoff from impervious surfaces, and staff supports the recommendations related to water quality. In the next section, there's also, the plan provides numerous recommendations, noting that these will result in reduced vehicle miles traveled, delay, reduced carbon energy demand, consumption, clean energy, improved carbon sequestration, reduced heat island effects, all of which will improve air quality and reduce carbon emissions. Again, within this section, staff supports the recommendations related to air quality and carbon emissions. The last section that we will start to talk about today, I don't know how much will get covered, has to do with parks, trails, and open space. As you know, that in 2017, the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan was developed by the Parks Department. It suggests that each master plan include an open space system that addresses specific needs, including active recreation destinations, a possible central civic green, urban park, an interconnected system of walkways, trails, parks, and open space. Within this plan study area, there are, I believe it is 10 parks. Currently, they're listed on page 5 of the report. In addition, you have the Sligo Creek Trail, which is located within the greater community, and the Ireland Drive Trail connector to Rock Creek Trail nearby. Capitol Crescent Trail lies to the west of the plan area. And a lot of the transportation recommendations that you've reviewed or that are contained in the plan seek to improve and enhance the connectivity between the park, trail facilities, the neighborhoods, and activity centers. What this section in the plan focuses on instead are the recommendations for additional parks and open space and recreational facilities as a result of projected redevelopment in the plan area. So we're really talking about recommendations related to new facilities. The specific open space and park recommendations for Forest Glen and Montgomery Hills are shown on a map, map number 17 on page 54, and they're described in table 5 on page 55. There's also a recommendations section text under park, trails, and open space, and it provides additional text related to recommendations for about half of the facilities that are listed in map 17 and on table 5. The recommendations Also provide what are called area-wide recommendations for things such as promoting art and sensory integrated installations within the park system. Staff supports these broad area-wide recommendations in the plan. However, as far as the specific park properties are concerned, you can turn to page 6 of the report. You'll see that's a listing of the potential park properties, the classification given to these parks, and the park sizes.
Can I ask a quick question on these? The SHA right-of-way, you have it as 3 acres. Does that include when the street is added into the
So,
parcel?
yeah, there's been some clarification since I wrote the report. I received
Okay.
some more information from planning staff. And a different place in the plan, they note that property size is 3.7 acres. I think recently I got information from planning staff, it was closer to 3 acres. Another spreadsheet I had received from planning had it at about 2.5 acres, which you have in this table. I would say it's probably closer to 3 acres. Yeah, that's what planning staff is now. And it's complicated. There are multiple parcels that make up that property, and including right-of-way, and so I think the 3 acres is now the number we should consider.
That includes the
Including
16th
right
Street
of way, yes.
reclamation?
Yeah.
The 3 acres, okay.
So one of the first sites is the Silver Spring Health and Human Services Building. That's the building down on Spring Street in Georgia, or just, I guess, north of there. It is basically abutting Woodside Urban Park. You have a recommendation that was in the table for what looks like an urban recreational park and community gardens of quite a large size. But the text in the plan really suggests that it should be considered to remain in some public use that may be a co-located school or a park facility, or for the provision of affordable housing.
Yeah, so you're recommending that we may want to say just either a school or affordable housing?
Right, I mean, this is abutting Woodside Urban Park, so you do have a relatively decent-sized park right beside it. It seems
Yeah.
that the other public goods might be something useful for a public property.
Yeah.
We don't disagree with that, but I think it's worth mentioning that there's a basketball court that's part of that old school building, and we'd like to see if, whatever happens there, if it's housing, that's great. If we can just make sure that we integrate it with the park. It's not necessarily to turn it into a part of the park, but there's potential for other recreational amenities.
Sure.
I think it's easy to add language that talks about the integration of the sites together.
Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with adding the language. I think school or affordable housing are better uses for this property given the adjacent park, but I think adding language, since we control the asset, to add language to say that we want to ensure that it's integrated with the adjacent park to maximize recreational opportunities or something along those lines, I think would be appropriate there.
I guess I would just say educational use. I mean, it could be a pre-K facility, it could be even something in the nonprofit sector, yeah. So educational use or affordable housing.
I agree.
Okay, great. The next one on the list is the SHA at right-of-way that's at 16th and Georgia that we were just talking about, that is actually 3 acres in size, so more consistent with possibly an urban recreational park, which is 3 acres in size. Those match up quite well. But again, the committee, especially on taking the tour, there was a lot of discussion about the optimal use of public land. And so either this recommendation can move forward as an urban park, if in fact the committee wants to have a further discussion of other opportunities or options related to this, then I would suggest that occur during the discussion on land use and zoning, but that's up to the committee.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would like, first of all, to see a budget for this as a park. I'd like to understand if we're talking about 2 million, 5 million, 10 million.
Yeah, we can address that. The first question is acquisition. We've been talking to SHA about this parcel. They seem to be prepared to part with it. We believe we can get it for free because it will be in mitigation for other state highway projects. If you were to upzone this and recommend it for housing, we might be in an entirely different situation as far as having to acquire it for a higher value. And
I don't really buy that. I
Something
think if
come
it
with
was
cash.
still used for mitigation, I think that their purpose would be achieved. I think that's really the goal that they would have, is to ensure that their mitigation is provided, but
the point
I'm
is
not
that the mitigation
saying what I
has to come-
favor per se. I would like a budget for this as a park. I did hear one number that blew my hair back, and I would like to know.
And we've got at least a planning level estimate of 2 to 4 million, depending on what amenities it has in it.
I think that I think we should just keep our options open here, but if you could send that estimate over, please. Andrew.
Yeah, I am absolutely for finding every opportunity in this plan and in all of our plans to maximize housing broadly and affordable housing specifically. I think this site, however, I think really does provide a rare opportunity in an urban setting to have a park large enough to have significant recreational opportunities, including ball fields potentially, is my understanding. And I think given that, and given that I could serve a much broader audience with ball fields than just the adjacent communities, I'd be much more interested in ensuring that we maintain this in the plan as proposed parkland, all of it, the full 3 acres or 3.7 acres, whichever is the right number. And obviously there's movement that would need to happen with the right-of-way, et cetera, in order to do that. And then I think there are other opportunities like we just saw with the Silver Spring HHS site and others, some of these smaller pocket parks that I do think would be appropriate to look at maximizing housing there. But I think keeping this entire asset, and originally I had thought about doing both, maybe 1 acre for missing middle housing, conforming to across the street, and 2 acres for park, or vice versa. But in thinking about it and the rare opportunities that we have for a parcel this size to be able to use for broader recreational opportunities, including ball fields, I think that it would best serve the community and the county at large, where it is increasingly difficult down county to have sites that can accommodate ball fields.
I also want to mention Jay Cole's here, and I didn't want to bring her back unless it was absolutely necessary, but she could speak, I think, to some of the constraints to getting any park at all if there's something else going on the site.
Sure. Jay Cole, Chief of the Park Planning and Stewardship Division. So I know there's been talk about sort of co-locating affordable housing with the park. I think that after you get your stormwater management requirements, that's probably a non-starter. Maybe we can fit a tot lot on there with affordable housing. The other aspect is even with the ball field, maybe a playground and parking, it's still going to be tight. We're going to have to be really, really creative in how we build it. That's why we are designated as an urban recreational park, because we're going to have to fit a lot more into that smaller footprint. So that $2 to $4 million range is a rough estimate, depending on what is approved through the facility plan.
Thank you for that update. That was going to be one of my questions. So we're on the map here, which I appreciate. Where's the closest park? Is it Woodside, or where's the?
You zoom out.
You zoom out a little bit in relationship to where we are.
So
I think it's Woodside, but
Montgomery Hills has a park.
Montgomery Hills has a park there.
And there's there are 2 school sites that are relatively close by. They are not parks, but the Yeshiva School, which is a site that has been leased to them from the county, has a very large area for ball fields.
Okay.
But
Yep.
again, it's not a park.
On that point, I should mention, since I live in the neighborhood, I have 2 kids who've played soccer. They have practiced at Yeshiva before, but have had to go as far away as Hillendale for practice fields, because those Yeshiva fields and the ones at Rosemary Hills are often oversubscribed. There's just too many teams that want to practice at the same time. And that's really the key point here, is that it's not just here's a nice sized park space. It's one of the few spaces you're ever going to find down county where you have space to add an actual permittable athletic field that you can have practices on that's locally accessible. We just don't get those very often.
And even with this size, we think, to your point, Jay, it's going to be tight, even if you're able to get it at all on there. An actual size might have to be a smaller size field.
no.
field size wouldn't be a problem. It's the accoutrements that go with it.
Well, the people
Yes.
that get to the field
The
and
the
park there,
parking,
yeah.
the stormwater management,
Yeah.
a place for the younger kids to play. It can fit, but it's not your normal local park where we have all of the space. So.
And then, okay, that makes sense. And then to your point, Mr. Anderson, the mitigation, SHA, you said that if we were to look at housing, you think, you finish that point that you were making and why you say that it might
Again,
cost more?
SHA needs the land from us, the Parks Department, not just any land. So it's not like, I mean, the county sometimes has land that they might have implicated in an SHA project. I'm not going to say that never happens. But our opportunity to negotiate with them is about parkland for parkland, not parkland for land for other county purposes. So I
Have you
think we
engaged
have
in that other county purposes conversation? Have you even broached it?
No, because
the plan had.
I would have to admit that we have not talked about that because we don't sit in the driver's seat for any of that. If there's other right-of-way that SHA wants from the county, I don't know about it, and we don't really have any visibility into it. But I'm just saying, we've been talking to Greg Slater. We do have ongoing discussions about mitigation that they would like, and we do that all the time. So we feel like we have an opportunity to jump on this and get it.
All right.
Pretty clear.
We'll discuss it more on December 2nd. I haven't made my mind up either. I think there's also a lot of competing priorities here. We have to balance the amenities. Everyone wants a park. I mean, I understand that. I know that area well. But we also need to take advantage of the ability for affordable housing across the spectrum. So I think we just need to come back to it on December 2nd. But thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to move forward then, because I think we have just a teeny bit to finish, which is the last three park recommendations listed in Table 5 and shown on 17 are not included under the recommendations text section on page 55. So it's a little unclear whether, say, the recommendation for the Snyder's Superfoods and the fire station properties, which are combined together in that table, expect the park to come only if the properties redevelop as a whole, or if one of the two properties redevelop. And even in that case, it is quite a large ask. If it were just Snyder's, it would be 28% of their property. It would be 40% of the fire station property, if in fact it got a quarter-acre park. And if redeveloped together, that quarter-acre park would be about 16% of the combined properties. And then the other is the parking lot number 12 and Luzerne Avenue and Cedarview Court, which is just across from the SHA site. So this is a lot of park recommendations in a very small area. Certainly the one at the Seminary Shopping Center makes a lot of sense. It's a very large property, and green space there would be great. But if you take that recommendation, and supposing that the committee and the council go with the recommendation for a park at the SHA site,
I mean, there is a park right there, the Montgomery Hills Park. It's right there.
well, right. So do we need another park at Snyder's? Do we need another park on parking lot 12? Do we need another park across the street at the proposed missing middle site? Those are things to consider. And one thing we just heard was that if you do have this ball field possibly at the SHA site, what you may want to forego there is parking, and what you have a block away on parking lot 12 is a parking lot district parking lot. So to retain that as a parking lot may be something you want to think about in conjunction with where these parks land, so that you don't have to carve out parking for the park.
Help me understand. So you go back to the Schneiders. Where there's a call for a
According to
quarter-acre
Table 5,
park?
yeah. The Snyder Superfoods and Fire Station together are listed and recommended for a pocket green urban park of a quarter acre in size, which is about 10,000 square feet.
I mean, what's the idea there?
Well, I think it was to get some open space, but I would say,
Right. I mean, you want to have a quality built environment. You want to have,
yeah.
But-
There will be
you
open
want-
space requirements
but
as part
it's-
of the zone.
but there's
so-
open space requirements as part of the zone.
And I would also say, just to pound on the table a little bit here, the athletic field is the number one priority for parks in the plan. If we had to give on some of these other smaller parks, that I think is fine. You make a good point. There are other parks in the area. It would be good to get some open space. I mean, you don't want to just jam a bunch of buildings together, so I'm not going to say they're not important, but that SHA parcel could serve some of the park needs that are being met with these other things. Now, one concern is, if for whatever reason that SHA parcel deal falls through, SHA decides they're not going to move ahead with the realignment of the road, we can't do it for whatever reason, it's important, I think, to have these other park recommendations, but I think it would be perfectly reasonable to say, if you got that that substantial chunk of land of 3+ acres, that you can give something, or maybe not do a couple of these other smaller ones that are in the immediate area.
I just think what we want to be going for here is a quality built environment. People want a nice place, whether it's running to the store or whatever else will be the opportunity that will exist there. I find it hard to believe that people are going to walk very far to go to a corner park, inside of this future development, but they might pause for a moment, to relax and chat with a friend as they're coming in and out of a store. But as far as true park recreational needs, I mean, there are facilities nearby. And again, I'm just worried that we will load it all up and then find out that 20 years from now, we're right back here with, a concrete parking lot that is spewing stormwater into the street, and, there's 100 people living there and not living there who are living, a very long drive away. All right, comments. Andrew.
Yeah, I think we should take it up when we do the land use on December 2nd specifically here. I do think that we ought to reflect the priority in the plan. If my colleagues agree that, we should move forward with 16th Street as being a full park with the ability to do ball fields, and that is the top priority, we should reflect it as such. I tend to agree with the planning board chair and planning board overall recommendation that the large recreational opportunity is the priority, and then the other pocket parks are nice to haves, but that should be available if the SHA property doesn't come aboard. And I think we should reflect that in the plan and look at what we decide with some of the land use decisions and figure out there. But I think the language should be looser. I think just looking at the staff packet based on the size of the parks and the size of the parcels, I think there's some challenges there, frankly, and I think making it a little bit broader and a little bit more vague about, maximizing the opportunity for green space in redevelopment without being too overly prescriptive is probably the better way to do it, particularly with these small infill parcels, and in the context of the much bigger, broader serving park at SHA 16th Street.
And I just want to, J. Cole, again, make the clarification, and maybe when we come back on the second, we can specify it more. All of those recommendations are not for MNC PPC parks. So, for instance, when we were...
Sorry, say that again.
All of the park recommendations is park and open space. We're not specifically saying that this is an MNC Montgomery County Parks. Sometimes they're POPs, so the one that we're talking about right now would be to encourage a developer, as you guys are saying, to incorporate some open space or some gathering area into their development. All of those recommendations are not, we're not saying that we would like them as MNC PPC.
Right, and I think my point was, I think making the language broader to actually reflect that. I mean, I agree with that overarching goal. I'm not sure that that's how I read it in the plan, and so I think that we should amend the plan to reflect what the goal is, which is to make sure that we have some green space. But I think to the chair's point, which I agree with, a 1/10 of an acre site within a development of a redevelopment site is unlikely to be serving the broader community. It's likely to be serving the development community, and so saying that the goal is to have something that serves those residents makes sense, but to think that that's going to serve the broader community, I think, is highly unlikely, and I don't think that's inconsistent with the intention. I think we ought to just memorialize what our priorities are, what our expectations are, and provide some level of flexibility to the site plans to be able to allow the developer and the planning board to work together to achieve the goal without being overly prescriptive of how to get there.
And it is what we've learned in some of our other urban areas like Bethesda and Silver Spring, which is these very small postage stamp sort of open spaces don't serve a broader public use. They end up being used by the people, and they actually don't feel hospitable to others as well.
Yeah, it's a problem. I really think we're trying to move away from that philosophically. So last point before we break. So parking lot 12. That's the one right there. So that is recommended as a park as well?
Yes.
That's the one where I think the county executive is working on. He has a affordable housing idea there. So you recommended that one for a park, and you recommended the 16th Street space for a park, and then lots of little parks within the development. All right. Well, I think that, what's the decision point here? Are we approving any of that?
I don't think you have to. I think you can give me guidance that what we'll bring back, unless we've talked about it, sort of staff's recommendation was in line with the planning board. So you'll see there are other parks listed in this table that we didn't discuss. The WMATA site, the Forest Glen Medical Center, Dennis Avenue Health Center, Seminary Place Shopping Center. All those do seem well spread out and appropriate for the parks that are being recommended and the size of the properties. You also, as a committee, made a recommendation on the Silver Spring Health and Human Services site to include language regarding integration with the park next door. The things that are remained unresolved are the SHA site, and then the last three in Table 5, map sites 16, 15, and 21. Those can be brought back to you when we do land use and zoning.
All right, let's do that.
And we could take up any of the others then, too. so-
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can,
Yep.
we can always take up anything we want to at any time.
Yep.
As long as the staff knows in advance so they can be there.
Okay.
All right.
Is that good? We're done for today
We're
then.
done for today. Thank you.
Yep.